It's been a little while since UFC 309 took place. Enough that the dust has kind of settled, and it's possible for us to look at some of the events that transpired and try to decipher what broader implications they may have. Because, truthfully, I think UFC 309 was an event that might end up being rather consequential for Jon Jones, as well as MMA in the long run. This was a fight that nobody wanted, other than Jon, Stipe, and the UFC. It was practically forced down the throats of MMA fans for reasons I still don't fully understand. The fight had no real divisional relevance. If anything, it held up the heavyweight division because the reigning champ has refused to fight the interim champ. An interim champ who only existed because this fight was made in the first place. Jon vs. Stipe was presented as a historically important and a divisionally significant fight, which it wasn't. Now, Jon Jones wasn't fighting a 60-year-old, but he was fighting a 42-year-old, whose last fight was a brutal KO loss, nearly 4 years ago. Stipe's last win was a decision victory over a 41-year-old Daniel Cormier back in 2020. Some of the delay can be blamed on Jon getting injured, but I think that actually made the situation worse. The UFC had the opportunity to scrap the fight and book Jon versus Tom, but chose not to do so. Tom is rightly the focal point of most of the complaints MMA fans have made about this fight. However, this was an issue even when Jones vs. Miocic was initially booked last year, because the UFC passed over Sergey Pavlovich, who was on a 6-fight win streak at the time, all by KO or TKO. Many MMA fans were willing to overlook this at the time, possibly because Jon had just beat Serial Gain, as Jon likes to call him. Fans assumed this would just be a quick detour instead of the 20-month slog it turned into. That said, the mood seems to have shifted noticeably over time, probably because even for the normally obsequious UFC fanbase, it's difficult to justify giving a title shot to a 42-year-old who hasn't won a fight since 2020 over the active defending interim champ. So why was Jones vs. Stipe booked? What was the purpose of holding up a division for nearly 2 years? Some might say the obvious answer is money, but I don't know. Even if the UFC was hedging their bets and going with Jon vs. Stipe because they didn't believe Aspinall could win, there was still a better option if they were looking for one single cash grab fight. Jon Jones vs. Alex Pereira. If they were looking at this simply from a financial perspective, Jon vs. Stipe isn't even the best option. Yet it still got made, and I don't fully understand why. Since this fight was announced, we've heard a number of defenses for the fight. For the last 6 months, it felt like we couldn't go one press conference without Dana defending the decision to make Jon vs. Stipe, or just defending Jon in particular. There are far too many examples to get into, but my personal favorite was when Dana got so annoyed with Jon not being ranked number 1 pound for pound that he said he wanted to replace the ranking panels with AI. I'll get into Jon's motivations a bit later when I discuss the post-fight consequences of Jones vs. Miocic, but for the most part, Jon just seemed dismissive of the idea that he should have taken any other fight. The combination of Dana's defense of Jon and Jon seemingly calling all the shots for this fight has led some MMA fans to cook up conspiracy theories that Jon must have some blackmail on Dana.
He's the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world, and he's the GOAT. Numbers don't lie.
Does he have pictures of you?
I saw that on the internet too.
I can't say I believe that's true. On one hand, the way Dana had been heaping praise on Jon in the lead up to this fight was remarkably different to his treatment of Jon even a few years ago.
If I'm Jon Jones and I'm home watching this fight, I start moving to 85.
Let alone during something like the UFC 151 catastrophe. On the other hand, I don't think a lot of people were around for much of Jon's career. They didn't get to see the way the UFC moved heaven and earth for him in the past. Moreover, I think Dana in particular has always had this desire for the UFC to have its Michael Jordan, and Jon was the guy who fit that bill. So they've been more lenient with him than any other fighter. My suspicion is that Jon simply refused to fight anybody other than Stipe. I don't have any hard evidence to back that up. It's just a hunch based on the fact that Jon has been willing to sit out for long periods in the past. The lead up to this fight was generally kind of strange. Setting aside the Tom Aspinall talk for a minute, Jones never really seemed to get into his groove. Regardless of his transgressions, Jon has typically received a hero's welcome whenever he returns to competition after a long layoff. Not so this time. Tom Aspinall being mentioned got a bigger pop from the audience than anything Jon said or did.
For you personally, do you still want to see the winner of this fight fight Tom Aspinall to unify the heavyweight title?
Jon was dodging interviews with journalists he thought might be too friendly with Aspinall, and in the days leading up to 309, he did some insane mental gymnastics to create bad blood with Stipe. First, he got triggered by Stipe saying, "Bring it on, bitch," during the Countdown show. Then he went full Anthony Smith and concocted a bizarre story about Stipe attacking his kids.
First scenario, he said, my kids will never look at me like I'm an asshole. That was a direct attack to me and my family and my relationship with my kids.
That never happened, of course, but even when Stipe apologized for the imaginary slight...
Okay, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to disrespect him anyways. I was just, just the moment, heat of the moment. I mean, I guess, sorry. I don't know. Sorry for defending myself. I apologize.
Jon still wasn't content. Eventually, Jon decided to be the bigger man in the conflict that was entirely made up in his head and forgave Stipe. I said this on Twitter, but Jon is one of the only people I've ever seen gaslight himself. The point is, Jon seemed rather wrong-footed for the majority of the build-up to this fight, which I think will become significant later in the video. Ultimately, it was inconsequential to the fight, though. It went as we all kind of expected it to. Jon battered a 42-year-old who hadn't fought in almost 4 years and was working 24-hour shifts as a firefighter in the lead-up to the fight. Jon secured an opportunistic takedown early and then elbowed Stipe's face in for like 4 minutes. Round 2 and 3 were a bit different, though. Honestly, they actually both looked worse than I expected. But Stipe just looked ancient. Late in the third, Jon hit Stipe with a spinning back kick to the ribs, and it was basically over. If you're silly enough to believe this was even remotely close to the best version of Stipe Miocic, I challenge you to go watch any of Stipe's previous fights. Even in the second fight with Ngannou, where he got demolished, Stipe was still faster and lighter on his feet. Jon arguably looked slower than he ever has too, but Stipe seemed diminished in every capacity. There were moments in this fight where Stipe looked less mobile than Mike Tyson did against Jake Paul. This fight was supposed to be the one that gave us some answers about Jon Jones. And maybe it did, but they're conditional on how Stipe looked, and he looked so bad that it's hard to know what to make of any of this. If you actually believe that the version of Stipe that we got at UFC 309 was even close to how good he was at his peak, I want you to take a long, hard look at the top 10 of the heavyweight division. Tell me who you're confident he beats. Out of Aspinall, Gane, Volkov, Pavlovich, Blades, Almeida, Spivak, Tybura, Rosenstreich, and Lewis, who does he beat 6 times out of 10? I don't think the guy we saw at UFC 309 beats many of them. So where does that leave us? Well, Stipe unsurprisingly retired immediately after the fight. Jon paid lip service to the idea of not retiring in his post-fight speech, but when he was directly asked about fighting Tom Aspinall, he launched into a screed about Jesus Christ and then filleted Donald Trump. This is where I want to get into the topic of Tom Aspinall. I didn't mention him earlier in the video much for 2 reasons. One, I wasn't 100% sure that Jon would win. I mean, if Stipe somehow pulled out the victory, it would have made a lot of Jon's comments about Tom kind of moot. But more to the point, I think that the talk of Tom Aspinall is even more interesting after this fight, because of what it has to say about Jon's image and legacy. So let's examine some of what Jon has said, just in the lead up to this fight. When I watched Jon's pre-fight press conference, media scrums, and interviews, he said largely the same thing over and over again. He was taking the Stipe fight for his legacy.
I'm right now in it for legacy and for the big paydays. I'm looking for the legacy stuff. Tom doesn't give that to me. I'm not in the business of fighting what's hot right now. At this stage of my career, it's about true legacy.
Imagine the backlash any other fighter would face if they made such a preposterous claim. Picture Ilia Topuria saying that instead of fighting contenders at 145, he wanted to fight Jose Aldo because it would be better for his legacy. Except that comparison isn't even accurate, because Jose Aldo had fought 5 times since the last time Stipe fought, and he'd won 3 of them. I'm old enough to remember guys like Tyron Woodley being raked over the coals for talking about wanting to fight GSP. The fact that anyone would even humor Jon's legacy excuse is frankly ludicrous. I could obviously mention how fighting the interim champ does more for Jon's legacy than beating up a 42-year-old Stipe Miocic, but there is a point that ought to be addressed here. What made all of this talk about legacy especially ridiculous to me is the fact that Jon and Stipe weren't even fighting for the real belt. That still belongs to Francis Ngannou. You can't be the man unless you beat the man, a point that Jon himself made to Daniel Cormier years ago.
In order to go to sleep considering yourself the baddest motherfucker that has lived
throughout this era. You got to beat the baddest motherfucker. And I mean, he says, well, I didn't have to beat you. You beat yourself. And every time you say that, he validates what I'm saying. Yeah, you did. You just haven't beat me. You know what I mean?
The title that Jon and Stipe fought for is a made-up belt, which holds slightly more legitimacy than the BMF belt. In fact, I'd argue that Tom Aspinall's interim belt is a more credible belt, because at least it has been defended against a top contender. After ducking the rematch with Dominic Reyes, Jon sat out for 3 years, ducked Francis Ngannou, then won a paper belt against a guy who had just nearly been KO'd by Tai Tuivasa. Then he went on to choose a fight with Stipe Miocic instead of the number one contender. Jon's heavyweight title reign has always been a farce. That is important to acknowledge in my opinion, because all of the narrative building that Jon has tried to do can only be done if you pretend he isn't just a paper champ. For instance, in the lead up to this fight, Jon tried to spin the narrative that the interim title should never have been made, and that he never ducked Tom because he was never contractually obligated to fight Tom.
The only reason why there was an interim championship fight was because I got hurt and they needed to keep the importance of that Madison Square Garden event. They should have just been a replacement fight, just a main event fight. I think making it an interim fight was premature. You can't duck a man that you were never scheduled to fight. It's like saying you got turned down by a girl who you never even hit on. The Tom narrative came out of nowhere. He won a belt, and now suddenly I'm ducking him. I've never had negotiations to even fight him, if this makes sense.
We can debate whether an interim title should or shouldn't have been made. Personally, I don't think it should have been made if the UFC had no intention of unifying the titles. But it did get Tom a pay bump, so whatever. The bigger issue here is that Jon has avoided deserving number one contenders all along. More importantly, people aren't accusing Jon of ducking Tom Aspinall because he didn't fight him at UFC 309. What has upset people has been Jon's abject refusal to fight Tom next. On a few occasions, he came close to almost flat out saying it wasn't going to happen.
I feel like Tom Aspinall is, I don't want to say nobody. I'm going to call him this, fight the nobody. He just hasn't proven anything. He hasn't done anything.
If you defeat him, will you defend your belt against Aspinall, who has the interim title?
More than likely not. More than likely not.
At one point, he said he didn't want to do business with Tom because he was an asshole.
But he's just an asshole. Bro, if you had a little bit more respect, then maybe we could have worked something out, And I don't even want to give him the opportunity. Like, he just played his cards wrong with me personally.
Yeah, Tom's the asshole in this situation, not the drug test failing, drunk driving, pregnant woman T-boning fiancé puncher. What was Jon's alternative? Well, he seemed really set on Alex Pereira.
One of the guys that really gets my attention is Alex Pereira. Him and I are both 37 years old. We both weighed right around 235, 240. Alex is actually out competing. Tom Aspinall and Alex Pereira are not on the same level. But I would also willingly give up the heavyweight championship. Fighting Pereira for the Banff belt, that'd be cool. We both have 2 belts in 2 weight classes. And the night we fought, we'd be both fighting for our 3rd belt. And if the UFC doesn't want that to happen, then it won't happen. And I'll just move on with my life.
I want to make a couple of points here. First, I would be totally fine with Jon vacating the belt to have meaningless super fights. I don't want to watch them, but it would be infinitely better than holding up a whole division. Secondly, I think there is an aspect of Jon's deflections that most people haven't fully recognized. Yes, he is ducking Tom Aspinall, but listen to how he frames it.
And after this many years with this company and all the work that I've put in, I believe I'm at a place where I deserve to be able to say, I don't want to fight that guy. I want to fight this guy. I want to fight that guy.
In the lead up to Jones versus Miocic, Jon repeatedly tried to create the narrative that he shouldn't have to fight dangerous up-and-comers, that somehow he had earned the right to avoid being challenged, and that people only want to see him fight Tom because they have finally found a man who is younger and bigger than him.
I get that finally, after 16 years, we found somebody who's 7 years younger than me and 30 pounds bigger than me. Like, we finally found someone who may give me a great challenge. And everyone wants to see it so bad. But for me, it's like, what is it? What's in it for me?
Yeah, that is kind of the whole point of this thing we call competitive mixed martial arts. We want to see the best fighters in the world be tested.
I'm the best heavyweight in the world. Prove me wrong, Jon. If you think you are, prove me wrong.
That's what makes fights entertaining. And to be honest, I don't think Jon is unaware of that. I just think he has such a huge chip on his shoulder that he's offended by the very idea that the fans want to see him be challenged.
If you're a person that wants to see me really challenged, then I get it, right? Like I said, 7 years younger, like 35 pounds bigger than me, right? I get it.
For the same reason, he tries to put a negative spin on Tom Aspinall being bigger and younger than him, as if that wasn't the entire story of Jon's career. He didn't seem to mind when he was taller than everybody, or sometimes had a foot and reach advantage. He didn't mind being 8 years younger than his greatest rival, Daniel Cormier, an age difference, by the way, that is greater than the age difference between him and Tom. Now that Jon has reached the position of being the old veteran, he is unwilling to reciprocate to the younger generation and give them the same opportunities that he had. He wants to fight dangerous champions his own age. At the end of the day, that is why I don't think the outcome of Jones versus Miocic will change much about the way Jon has become perceived by fans. By so openly shooting down the idea of fighting Aspinall, Jon has frankly done a tremendous amount of damage to his already tarnished reputation. Before this fight, I didn't think anything could make much of a dent in Teflon Jon's aura. He survived drug test failures, numerous arrests, and domestic violence. MMA is a sport of what have you done for me lately, and it's very easy for the fans to forgive. In Jon's case, it always seemed like absence made the heart grow fonder, and MMA fans were willing to overlook his sins. MMA is a sport of what have you done for me lately, but that cuts both ways. What has Jon done for MMA fans lately? A lot of MMA fans were not around during the majority of his light heavyweight reign. They don't look back on it with rose-tinted glasses the way old fans do. To paraphrase Kamala Harris, modern fans are unburdened by what has been. It used to be that Jon's position as the greatest of all time was almost inarguable, but in light of Jon's recent behavior, people have been reevaluating where he belongs in that conversation. Ironically, Jon might have been right that this fight would be a legacy-defining fight for him, just not in the way he intended. The shameless ducking of Aspinall may be enough to permanently alter the way he is viewed in the public consciousness, if not the history books. The Aspinall debacle has made Jon look like a coward. Of course, it will take time to see how that unfolds. Some people are really holding out hope that Jon is just trolling or negotiating for a bigger payday to fight Tom, but I'm not convinced. The logistics just don't make sense to me. At the post-fight presser, Jon said he might fight Tom for fuck you money, an amount of money that's vague enough for people to latch onto without actually setting any terms.
I want to be so compensated. I want to say it, I want that fuck you money, honestly. Or else my life is perfect without him. I don't need him at all, and he needs me. And that's a good place to be in a negotiation.
Fuck you money could mean a lot of things. It generally means an amount of money too great for you to refuse. But what does that look like for Jones? In the past, Jon has asked for Deontay Wilder money, which would be somewhere in the range of $20 to $30 million. We don't know exactly how much Jon was paid to fight Stipe, but it was probably somewhere in the range of $10 to $15 million. So to arrive at that Deontay Wilder sum, the UFC would have to basically double Jon's purse. Nothing in UFC history suggests they would do that. They don't give people fuck you money, not even Conor. Maybe Jon is just looking for a pay bump, and he's trying to see if he can negotiate for something in the middle with the UFC. But again, I am skeptical. If Jon was unwilling to fight Francis 3+ years ago for less than $20 million, why would he be willing to fight a younger, possibly more dangerous guy for less money now that he himself is older?
But for me, if you were my manager, if you were on my team, why not fight against Pereira? Business-wise, it makes more sense.
I could be wrong, but I don't have much faith that this fight will materialize, regardless of what Dana White says about it being their biggest fight ever. The only thing that might make a difference is the fact that, unlike Ngannou, Aspinall really has no say in this decision. It's between Jones and the UFC, and much like the rest of us, Tom can kind of only sit around and wait to see what happens. Maybe he gets the call. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe Jon vacates to fight Jamal Hill and they promote Tom to reigning champ. Maybe they let Jon keep the heavyweight belt while he fucks off for a year to fight Alex Pereira, and Tom is forced to defend the interim belt. Maybe the UFC just says fuck it and strips Tom because he's no longer needed as the interim champ. Anything could happen, really. Personally, I think it was somewhat lucky for the UFC that Jones vs. Miocic took place a day after Jake Paul vs. Mike Tyson. Paul vs. Tyson was a more greedy and objectively evil fight, but it was also more shameless on a surface level that people can easily identify. At least it wasn't holding up a division. It wasn't undercutting the legitimacy of the competition at the elite level. You can't say the same for Jones vs. Miocic. I occasionally say that I don't view MMA as a real sport, and events like this are why. How can you argue that MMA is a legitimate sport when deserving contenders like Tom Aspinall get passed over whenever it is financially lucrative to do so? What purpose do interim belts have when they don't guarantee that you get the next title shot? If the UFC can't or won't make the biggest fights between the best fighters, then why should people be fans? Jon vs. Stipe isn't the first fight to raise these questions, but the series of events that has occurred from Francis Ngannou leaving the UFC to Jon fighting Stipe instead of the interim champ have made the questions very difficult to ignore. One thing I'm fairly certain about is that I don't think Jon can be goaded or bullied by the fans into fighting Tom. He's already cited the behavior of Tom's fans as contributing to his decision not to give Tom the fight.
I feel like Tom's been such an asshole that I don't want to do business with him. You know, it's just like his fans have been so annoying.
So any further attempts to troll Jon into fighting Tom will probably have the opposite effect. But again, it's up in the air right now. More recently, Jon has announced that he is in negotiations with the UFC and planning to fight in 2025. As is always the case with Jon, though, it's hard to predict where this is really leading. Things may change over the coming weeks and months, and Jon has shown time and time again that he is willing to sit out while he waits for the perfect moment to return to the octagon. With all that said, I do think that we will look back on this moment in Jon's career as a defining one. If he doesn't fight Tom, it will reflect very poorly on him. History will say that he stood at a crossroads, and when he had the option to truly pursue greatness, he chose the safer route. When he had the opportunity to give a young contender the chance that he was given so many years ago, he refused to give back to MMA. I think that sums up the last chapter of Jon's career pretty well. As always, I want to thank you for watching the video, as well as liking, commenting, and subscribing. And I'd like to give a special thank you to my supporters on Patreon, who help make these videos possible. Thank you. Squirt, Rusty Shackelford, Jackson, Fightback CBD, Mike Roballs, Bone CK, Mango Saver, Devil Stick Disco, Mad Max Burger, Gaius Nisha Patton, Scott Richmond, Random Candor, Fuzzy Yanus, Jonas Namenson, Dot Old Neon, Timothy Lee Peterson, Julius Caesar Has Jungle Fever, Firebrand, Quasi, Snepsts, Alex, Major General John Pope, and Neem.